Today I'll be showing you how to make tender pepper steak with onions and peppers just like takeout. But first, let's start with the ingredients that we're going to need. We have about 2 cups of water, 1 green pepper, and 1 onion. We have 1 teaspoon of cooking wine, 1/4 cup of cornstarch, half a teaspoon of sesame oil, 1 tablespoon of oil, 1 teaspoon of garlic paste, half a tablespoon of MSG, 2 tablespoons of soy sauce, more cornstarch, and 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Then we have 1.5 teaspoons of chicken bouillon, 1/4 of a teaspoon of black pepper, and 1 teaspoon of sugar and 1 teaspoon of salt. Now for the meat, what we have here is 1 pound of round top steak. You could also use minute steak, you just have to cook it less because it's very thin. Then we need to prepare our vegetables. We start by cutting open the green pepper. Then we need to remove the seeds. But if you're using any spicy peppers, then you don't need to remove the seeds. Then we need to cut the pepper. I usually just cut it into chunks. The size really doesn't matter, it's just all a preference. You could dice it, you could cut it into strips, or you could even cut it into rings. You just have to remember that it will cook faster the smaller you cut the green pepper. Then what we want to do is peel and cut the onion, and then again, just like the pepper, the size is just a preference. Just remember that if you cut it small, it will cook faster. I usually like to cut it into big chunks because when I'm done with this recipe, I always like to feel a little bit of texture in the peppers and the onions, but like I said, just a preference. Then what we have to do is cut the meat. Now to cut the meat, what we need to do is cut it at a slight angle. We want to cut the meat approximately 1 to 1.5 inches thick. And the reason why we want to cut the meat this way and so thin is mainly 1, so it could get tender, but 2 is so we could cook it quickly. But if you want to have bigger pieces, you could go ahead. It's not going to affect the recipe. It's just I like thin pieces just so I can make it quick. But if you want to cut your cooking time even more, you could go to the supermarket and get one of those prepackaged meats that come already cut. They usually called pepper steak or stir fry meat, and some of them even come with chopped onions and pepper. I just rather cut the meat myself so I could control the size. Then we go to the important part, that is to tenderize the meat. The way we do this is by marinating the meat in a baking soda solution. For this recipe, I'm using 1/4 cup of water to 1 teaspoon of baking soda. And remember that this is just for 1 pound of meat. But what about if you're using less or even more? Well, as a general rule, you have to use 1 teaspoon of baking powder per pound of meat. Then we mix the baking powder, meat, and water, and we let this sit for 15 minutes. Then the most important step is to wash off the baking soda. The reason why I wash the baking soda off, a lot of people doesn't, is because I don't like to have that metallic taste that often the baking soda leaves in the meat. Then we need to season the meat. We add the cooking wine, sesame oil, then we add the seasonings. We add chicken bouillon, sugar, salt, black pepper, and one of the most important flavors, the MSG. Some people don't like using MSG, and that's fine. But if you want that authentic Chinese restaurant type of pepper steak, you need to add the MSG. Then last, we want to add the cornstarch and the water. Then we need to make sure that we mix well everything. We do not want any lumps of cornstarch. This step right here is called velveting the meat, and this step is going to help with the texture of the meat. Now you'll notice how the meat is going to sit in like a watery batter. That's exactly what we want. We don't need a thick batter. It's just a very light coating, just like you see here. Now to fry the meat, we need a big pot and just enough oil so it could cover all the meat. Now, the bigger the pan, the better, because you could fit all the meat there and fry it at the same time. Now we set the heat to medium high, and once the oil is hot, we want to start frying the meat. The meat is going to take about 3 to 4 minutes to cook. Make sure to stir while frying because the meat tends to stick together. A question that I get asked often is, do I have to fry the meat? And the answer to that is no, you don't have to fry the meat. You can skip this step and just pan fry the meat in a little bit of oil, or you can even use a cooking spray and cook it that way. But frying the meat does make a lot of difference. Frying the meat offers the benefit of a crispy texture, and it also helps the meat absorb the sauce better. Remember, you don't have to worry about the meat cooking through because you're gonna cook it again with the sauce and the vegetables in the pan. Now, one of the good things about this recipe is that you don't have to completely make it the whole thing the same day. You could fry the meat one day and then the other day you could go ahead and finish it. Or you could even freeze the meat up to 3 months and then finish the recipe whenever you want to enjoy it. After you finish frying your meat, it should look like this. It should have some nice crispy borders, and once you break it apart, it should snap quickly. It is tender and delicious. Right now it's ready to eat and it's actually pretty tasty. Then we let the meat rest while we prepare the rest of the recipe. We need a large pan. The pan should be large enough to be able to hold the meat, the vegetables, and the sauce. It is best to cook this recipe in a wok, but if you don't have one, you could use a regular non-stick pan just like I'm gonna use one here. Now take your pan and set it over medium-high heat. Then you want to add a tablespoon of oil. We add the onions and the peppers and we need to saute them for at least a minute or two. We just want to sweat the vegetables a little. We don't want to cook them because at the end of the recipe, we want these vegetables to still have a nice crunch. Now, if you want to add more vegetables, you can't just try to add vegetables that won't change the taste in the recipe. You can add broccoli, you can add carrots, you can even add mushrooms. All of those options are delicious. Then after we saute the onions and peppers, we want to add the garlic and cook for about a minute. Then we want to make the sauce for the recipe. The way I like to do it is I like to take my soy sauce and add it to the water. And then I take the cornstarch and add it to the water and mix it well. The reason I do it this way is because I want to avoid any lumps in my sauce. If you just throw everything in the pan, that's what's gonna happen. You're gonna have big lumps of cornstarch that are not good at all. So make sure to mix this sauce until you no longer see the cornstarch, until it has a nice even brown color. Then add this mix to your pan and stir. And then you can add your meat and stir again. I always recommend people to double on the sauce. This is especially true if you're gonna serve this pepper steak with like white rice or fries where you want to really have a lot of sauce to get everything nice and moist. It is also good to have extra sauce, so whenever you reheat, let's say leftovers, you still have a lot of sauce left and it won't get dry. After you add your meat, you have to cook for 6 minutes while constantly stirring. You could cook this more or less in this stage. It just depends how thick you want your sauce to be. But for me, the saucier the better. You'll notice that when your sauce is thicker, it's gonna start to bubble. You need to keep stirring to make sure it doesn't get too thick. It is always a good idea to keep your sauce on the watery side because once the sauce cools off, it always tends to dry. And once our sauce is ready, we are ready to serve. And remember that this is a great recipe to freeze. All you have to do is let it cool down, pack it up, and put it in your... This is a delicious recipe that you could serve with fried rice, white rice, tostone, french fries, with whatever you want basically. Remember that the complete printable recipe is going to be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching. Buen provecho.